nós vamos receber a Harger, que é diretora artística da Lighthouse, que é uma agência cultural voltada para a indústria criativa.
Thank you. We'll maybe have to have the lights off so that people can see the screen. I want to start, as everyone has, by thanking Ivan sincerely for the invitation to be here. It's such a privilege to be in Rio. And I also want to thank Eloisa for everything that she's done for us since we've arrived. So huge thanks to Fijan and everybody for inviting me. So, a bit about me. Now I know something about you. So I'm the artistic director of a digital culture agency based in the UK in a city called Brighton, called Lighthouse. And what we do is work with artists and filmmakers and technologists on creating productions like exhibitions or events that are really trying to show that digital culture is about more than just tools and computers and technology. It's about emotion, aesthetics, and learning. And it's about trying to perceive the societal transformations which are being brought about by digital technology and science. And I also write a blog which looks at science and technology, mainly physics and astronomy. And I say this to illustrate that I'm really interested in the point of confluence between art, science, and technology. I'm fascinated by what happens when artists, filmmakers, and other creatives like designers are thinking just as hard about technology as the scientists and engineers are. Now, we might ask ourselves if it's really relevant to be talking about digital art or digital culture when technology has become so pervasive, it's everywhere now, that it's almost mundane. Surely, as it becomes enfolded into the practice of all art, digital art as a kind of sub-form becomes a bit obsolete. Well, I would argue the opposite. I would say that digital artists, or media artists as we sometimes call them, are some of the most culturally deep and urgent guides we have for a landscape which is becoming increasingly difficult to navigate with the maps and compasses that we all grew up with. Today, I want to talk to you about how digital artists are the canaries in the mine, detecting weak signals about how our technologised world is shaping up. And I want to show you how they give us both ways of perceiving this changing world, but also, crucially, acting within it. So I want to start by something that some of you might know, because this is actually an artwork from Brazil. So we're looking here at an installation called Genesis, made by the artist Eduardo Katz, who's of Brazilian origin. And it's a complex artwork that explored the relationship between biology, belief, technology, and ethics. And amongst its many facets was this little piece here. What that says is that a sentence from the Bible was translated into Morse code and then converted into DNA. Now, this seems to suggest that DNA, the stuff of life, could be used as a data storage mechanism. Well, this seems like a mad idea, right? Well, 13 years later, the media exploded with stories of this. This is from last year, and this is proof of concept that DNA, the stuff that we're made of, the stuff of life, is indeed the data storage mechanism of the future. And this comes over a decade after Eduardo Katz suggested exactly the same thing. Now, this is not an isolated case. The examples of where art seems to point at exactly what's about to happen within the technology industry are legion. So much so that the artist Golan Levin has put together a whole website documenting what he calls media art prequels. So what's this telling us? Are we to believe that media artists have predictive powers, much like those ascribed to science fiction writers? Well, I'd argue no. The reality is much more subtle than this. Media artists, like science fiction writers, are fluent in what Lev Manovich, the theorist, would refer to as the language of new media. Their creative perspectives, decision-making and aesthetics are highly influenced by the systems and tools that they use. Media artists are engaged in a careful consideration of science and technology, as are scientists and engineers. So therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that they sometimes arrive at the same conclusions, albeit often at different times. Their propensity to do so makes the field of media art a really interesting place to look if you're wanting to detect weak signals about what might happen next. So, what are some of the things that the media artists are telling us today? Well, they're telling us that we must be able to read our environment. The more heavily encoded our world becomes, the harder it is to read. Our technologized world is becoming opaque. Pervasive automated machine surveillance gives us the impression that machines are watching our every move. Algorithms are loose within the stock market, automatically carrying out trades. Entire cities are being planned for the exclusive use of machines. As technology becomes more ubiquitous, our relationship with our devices is becoming ever more seamless, and our technical infrastructure is becoming ever more invisible. We now refer to the vast server banks which store our personal data as the cloud. Now, this really implies a kind of de-solidification of infrastructure that, as we can see here, is very much bricks and mortar. But so ingrained has this metaphor become that a recent survey revealed that over half of all Americans believe that bad weather affects cloud computing. Not sure if our friends here are amongst that 50%. In reality, if you're looking for really where the internet really is, you'd be better off looking here, under the sea. Because our digital world is enabled by thousands of miles of submarine cables, that quintessentially 19th century technology. They carry data, the information that we use every day, from one continent to the next. We passively rely on this infrastructure for all of the information and communication that we use to orientate ourselves in the world. But we're dangerously unaware of how it works. We can't even see it. It's invisible. And as the writer China Melville says, something invisible in the landscape is just landscape. The point of invisibility is to fail. The disappearance of our technological infrastructure and our technological landscape from view is a political and ethical issue. Because if we can't see something, it's very difficult to comprehend it, let alone have any political agency in acting on it. So for the past 2 years, my organisation, Lighthouse, have been thinking about this and worrying about this very hard. And we've undertook a series of curatorial investigations, mostly in the form of exhibitions, but also events and workshops, that look into these invisible infrastructures that make up our world. So we started this investigation in 2011 with an exhibition called Invisible Fields that revealed the radio spectrum, the invisible environment that enables all of our telecommunications technologies today. It was co-curated by me and Jose Luis de Vicente, and it happened in Art Santa Monica in Barcelona. And it set out the spectrum as a physical space, invisible but present, a terrain that can be studied, mapped, surveyed and explored. And it included works like this. This is by the Brighton-based artist Semiconductor, Ruth Jarman and Joe Gerhardt. And they explored invisible, naturally occurring radio waves which resonate through our world. This is a piece that we commissioned for the show called 20 Hertz. And what you're looking at and listening to there is a magnetic storm which is happening in the Earth's upper atmosphere. These happen when the sun's solar wind hit our ionosphere far above us and cause phenomena like the aurora, the northern lights. What they did was that they took radio waves from these magnetic storms, turned these radio waves into sound. So what you're hearing here is very low frequency radio emissions caused by the sun interacting with the earth. And they then took the sound waves and they turned those into these visually vibrating particles that you can see there. So it's a visualization of the sound. So we're having this quite tangible, physical encounter with a radio storm that's completely beyond our sensory, kind of experience. We can't see these storms, we can't hear them, but through the intervention of art, we have a very tangible experience of them. The show also included practitioners like Tema Arnau, whose work that we're looking at here. Tema is also the subject of our next solo exhibition at Lighthouse. And Timo's work gives us tangible encounters with imperceptible technologies. Let me see if I can get that to play. Oh, too bad. I'll just tell you. This is explored by pieces like Immaterials, which visualizes Wi-Fi technology, which is invisible to us, but central to our experience of daily life. Now, this notion of why this idea of invisibility is dangerous is beautifully summarized here by Timo, who says that intentionally hiding technology, smoothing over the edges and the seams that make systems what they are, leads to a loss of understanding, both for the makers of technology, but also for the users. And a loss of understanding means a loss of agency. It means a loss of personal power. A lack of understanding also leads to all sorts of misconceptions and childish metaphors about technology. Remember that cloud survey that kind of sums up these sort of childish metaphors which create these types of confusion. As Timo says here, it clouds the critique around technology. This applies far more widely than the sphere of design, which is what Timo was referring to. This tendency that invisibility has to cloud critique is one of the central concerns of the artist Trevor Paglen. We showed his first UK solo show last year called Geographies of Seeing. And in it, Paglen is using the technologies of astronomical photography to expose hidden infrastructures of power and the clandestine activities of global government. His first target was our night sky. The official catalogue of spacecraft currently in orbit has around how many objects in it? Can anybody guess? Objects in orbit around the Earth? Anyone want to give us a guess? Hundreds? 5,000? 20,000 objects currently in orbit around the Earth. But what's not in the official catalogue is all the secret satellites which are operated by the governments of our world and mainly their militaries. Paglen and his collaborators have tracked these secret satellites and photographed around 189 of them. And that's what you're looking at here in these stunning photographs. To track these satellites, Paglen's using the same mathematics that Johannes Kepler used to describe the laws of planetary motion, in the 17th century. And the use of these basic techniques of the early Enlightenment is, to expose secret and largely invisible activities is entirely deliberate. As Trevor Paglen has noted, Galileo used the state-of-the-art technology of his time, the telescope, to observe that Jupiter had moons that really weren't supposed to be there. The moons undermined the established truth of the day, the Ptolemaic worldview, which said that the Earth was at the centre of the universe. Those moons orbiting around Jupiter meant that had to be wrong. Now, this was radical because it meant that anyone, no matter who they were, could use a telescope to see the same thing. The democratising potential of technology meant that the truth could emerge from consensus, completely different idea about how information was collected. So Paglen's interested in how we can use those same tools and techniques now, not to reveal unexpected moons orbiting around Jupiter, but man-made moons orbiting our own planet, unmapped by any official record. Because if we can't see them, we can't start asking why they're there, what they're doing, what are they looking at, and why is all this being kept from us? These are questions that are fundamentally important to anybody who wants to have political agency in this contemporary world. Paglen also applies these same techniques to observe and reveal invisible locations closer to home. In particular, secret US military bases. Many of these bases are so remote that there's nowhere on Earth that you can go to see them with the unaided eye. They are, for all practical intents and purposes, invisible. Paglen's work exists within an established tradition of media art, which has made it its business to reveal the invisible infrastructures that underpin society. And this tradition is being extended by a new generation of practitioners. The science fiction writer William Gibson has said in relation to new technologies that some of the most interesting applications turn up on a battlefield or in a gallery, which sounds like a little bit of an unlikely juxtaposition, but the two new projects that we created this year for Brighton Festival in my town show that in some cases, certain chilling applications can appear in the same place simultaneously, the battlefield and the gallery. Following on from Trevor Paglen's show, we deepened our examination of invisible infrastructures by looking at the technologies of warfare. In recent times, we've all become acquainted with these guys, the unmanned aerial vehicle or drone. I should point out that that's not a real drone. This is one of the most famous doctored images on the internet right now. This is an entirely fake image. This one's real though. The drone has become, as I think we all know, one of the most potent weapons of contemporary warfare. And they're remotely controlled weapons. Their operators are sitting thousands of miles from the theatre of war. Drones carry out aerial attacks which leave hundreds, if not thousands, of people dead. And they're one of the most controversial weapons of war, partly because of their ability to operate unseen and to strike without warning. The artist and technologist James Bridle has carried out a series of projects that attempt to reveal the presence of drones in the landscape. For Dronestagram, which is what we're looking at here, James collected photographs of the locations of drone strikes and shared them on the photo service Instagram. The images of deserted, barren landscapes and abandoned buildings have a sobering potency when juxtaposed with the pictures of cats and parties that we know sort of more normally would associate with Instagram. But it's what we don't see in these images that gives them such an emotional power, and that's the mortality. For his latest public intervention, which we commissioned for Brighton Festival, a military drone made an eerie incursion into the daily lives of Brighton residents. So let's see if this one plays. If not, I'll have to play that one manually for you. Gonna play. No. Sorry.
Under the shadow of the drone is a one-to-one outline of a military unmanned aircraft, a drone, in this case a Reaper drone, which is an armed drone which is currently in service with the American and British Air Forces all around the world. We've drawn it on the Brighton seafront here as part of the Brighton Festival, as part of an ongoing project I'm involved in, visualising and trying to understand military drones and some of the technology behind them. I've been interested in drones for some time, not just as weapons of war, which in this case, in the case of the Reaper, they very much are, but also as prosthetics of the network, as kind of extensions of so much of our technology. Technology now is something that surrounds all of us. Almost all of our technologies have become networked, but they're largely invisible to us. We don't see them, and therefore it's quite hard for us to truly understand them. We don't form useful mental models of them. So one of the regular exercises I do is to try and work out how to visualize these things by sketching them out. In this case, a very literal representation of a largely invisible technology. So many of our technologies are so invisible, and we lack full understanding of what they do and how they affect our lives, which means none of us really are capable of using them to their capacity or understand how they might be used against us. By making them visible, we start to understand a little more about how these technologies work, and therefore we have a greater agency in the world. We understand how to use those technologies for our own benefits, and we start to understand some of the moral implications of how they might be used, and therefore we can have a rational, genuine discussion with governments and different forms of power about how we think these things should be used. There are definite parallels now between the way people are looking at drone technologies and the way they looked at nuclear technologies. The drone on its own is just a radio-controlled plane, essentially. We've added missiles to it, that kind of adds a sense of dread, but it's not really about the drone itself that should be of concern to us. It's the way in which the drone permits certain kinds of warfare. The drone is essentially a weapon to target militants within civilian populations, and therefore it brings with it a whole bunch of extra questions about collateral damage. It allows a huge number of current intelligence gathering techniques to be hidden behind a veil of technology. What's important here isn't really the technology itself, which appears in all kinds of different ways in the world, but the way in which technology can be used to obscure deeper and perhaps morally questionable attitudes.
So in that clip, James emphasised that the drone can be seen as analogous with the network itself, an invisible, inherently connected technology which allows sight and action at a distance. So we can start to see now that this is a political issue. We need media artists because they enable us to see the technologised landscape for what it is, tangible, material, and made by us. They insist that we must not just be able to perceive it, we have to learn how to read it. As the artist Julian Oliver would say, we'd have to learn how to describe it, because it's only then that we'll have political agency within this rapidly changing world. And let's not forget just how rapidly the world around us is changing. We're here speaking about digital culture, but some of the most urgent work today is being made by the new materials of the post-digital age. This here is an invisible machine. I know it looks like an electrical engineering circuit, but it's actually an example of one of the most transformational technologies of our time. This is where the biologists in the room have a little bit of an advantage. This is an example of a piece of technology called synthetic biology. This is a genetic logic circuit, and it's designed to identify cancer cells and make them self-destruct. It's a virus, and it's a virus that's been programmed by scientists. It uses Boolean logic to, if you like, ask cells that it meets 5 questions. And if the answer to all of those 5 questions is yes, it identifies the cell as cancerous and it causes it to self-destruct. Now, this isn't speculative design, it's not art. This is a real experiment made in 2011 using standardized biological building blocks called biobricks. These are rapidly doing for biology what Arduinos did for electronics. And it was presented most recently, not in a biomedical conference, but in an arts venue. This is Adam Rutherford at my place at Lighthouse talking about synthetic biology. You see, media art's been actively surveying and mapping this new landscape for years. In the past couple of years alone, the most important media art festival, Ars Electronica, has awarded prizes to artists making solar-powered 3D printers, artists making paintings with nanotechnology, artists making radio stations out of bacteria, and artists inventing sailing drones that collect oil from spills. These are the people who are actively engaging with the dominant social, political, and environmental issues of our day. So if we're looking for guides through this intriguing moment that we find ourselves living through, we should look to media artists, to critical engineers, and speculative designers. They are the cartographers who can help us describe the uncertain features of the near future landscape and to take us beyond the failure of invisibility. Obrigada. If you want to look at any of the artworks that I showed, that URL's got all of the links and credits and everything there.